Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the October 20th, 2020 meeting of the Water Quality Advisory Work Group, our virtual meeting. Thank you for joining us. My name is Greg Easley, and I manage the Water Quality Assessment section in the Water Quality Division here at TCEQ, and I'll be your moderator for today's meeting. And we've got several items on our agenda today that we want to bring to you, and essentially permit, rule, and program updates that we want to pass on to you. But before we get into those, I just wanted to mention a couple of housekeeping items, and then we'll introduce the speakers for today's meeting after that. But first, for those of you who are participating, if you haven't done so already, we would encourage you to register on our attendance roster, and to do that, if you could please send an email to our outreach mailbox, which is outreach@tceq.texas.gov. So send an email to that address with the meeting initials WQAWG in the subject line, and just put in there your title, contact information, and we'll put you on the attendance roster for today's meeting. And details about that process are at the bottom of of the meeting's agenda. So again, this meeting is being done virtually through Microsoft Teams Live, and hopefully you've had experience working with that. For today's meeting, we're going to do our Q&A session after we go through all the meeting topics, the meeting items, and we're going to use the Q&A feature in the platform to take questions and respond to each one. So at any time during the meeting, you can type in your questions in the Q&A box and submit those to us, and then we'll go through them in the order we receive them, and get to everyone's questions and provide a response to each one. So with that, I want to have my colleagues introduce themselves as far as the ones giving the presentations today, and we'll start with Rebecca Villalba.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rebecca Villalba, and I'm the team leader for the Stormwater team.
And Lori?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was on mute. I'm Laurie Fleet with the TCEQ Wastewater Permitting section.
Good afternoon, I'm Sarah Johnson with the Industrial Wastewater Permitting team.
I'm Mike Lindner, team leader, Industrial Wastewater Permits.
I'm Peter Schaefer, team leader of the Standards Implementation team.
All right, thank you, everyone. And unfortunately, we don't have a good way to introduce all of you who are watching the meeting, so we'll just go ahead and proceed with the items on our agenda. And the first up are several general permit updates that we want to give to you, and we'll start with Rebecca Villalba, and then she'll hand it off to Lori Fleet after she's done.
Good afternoon again. As I mentioned, I'm going to give you an update on Stormwater program, what's going on right now. So right now, what is of interest to a lot of you is the renewal of our multi-sector general permit, that is TXR 050,000. And this general permit regulates stormwater discharges from industrial activities. The permit expires August 14 of 2021. And we started the renewal process last year in September. We initially started with a stakeholder meeting in October, exactly a year ago. And to propose our changes, we received comments We drafted the permit and sent the permit to EPA for their review on May 15 of this year. On August 20th, we received an approval from EPA. We had no objections. This is the second round of our general permit cycle for the multi-sector general permit where EPA approves it without an objection. So we were very happy about that. So we currently are preparing the permit to start the briefings for our upper management, executive management briefings to get permission to publish notice in the newspapers in the Texas Register across the state to hopefully publish sometime early mid-December of this year to start the 30-day comment period. The 30-day comment period would, of course, end 30 days later in January. And on the very last day of the comment period, we will also have a public meeting. So please stay tuned for further updates on that. We do have our website that will be updated with the date of when we publish in some newspapers across the state and in the Texas Register. So briefly, some of the changes that we are making to the permit are that we are adding the NAICS codes in addition to what we already have currently in the SIC code. So those tables have expanded, look a little different. We will have both the SIC codes and the NAICS codes. We are adding some items that need to be submitted as a notice of change into the NOIs regarding electronic reporting. That's a federal requirement that we have to make sure that we capture certain information. As well as we are going to require the delegation of signatories, those notices, those forms, those letters that we receive, which are many that we receive by paper, that they will be submitted and filled online through STEER. So that will definitely help us and will help everybody speed up the process, save on a mail postage for all of you that submit those delegation signatory forms. We're also clarifying some requirements in the permit regarding some activities for federal categorical guidelines. For example, in Sector O, we are saying that only facilities that have a coal power runoff are subject to the requirements. So right now, it's not very clear sometimes where certain things apply to certain facilities and some don't apply to them. So we're clarifying some of those requirements. Also for Sector J, which is the mineral mining, we are adding some best management practices from the construction general permit. So this is to make both permits in line regarding the requirements. For example, outside vehicle tracking of sediments, generation of dust, and dewatering of standing water. Another sector of interest that we have updated is Sector L, which is the landfills. We are added definitions for final cover, intermediate cover, and we replaced the term of trenches with units. So this is to come to be in conformance with the solid waste rules. Something else that we are adding that is slightly different and new, but this is going along with the other efforts that we are conducting in the Water Quality Division regarding plastics, is that we are adding a pollution prevention measure and control requirements language for all facilities that handle pre-production plastics. That includes virgin recycled plastic resin pellets, powders, flakes, powder additives, regrinds, scrap waste, and recycling material, so that those facilities can eliminate plastics in stormwater. Then specifically for Sector Y, which is the rubber manufacturing sector, we have added some additional stormwater pollution prevention plan requirements to include some best management practices to prevent the discharge of plastic materials in stormwater. The other change that is of interest to some of you is that we have adjusted 2 benchmark values. This permit cycle, we're only adjusting 2 benchmark values. One is for Sector T. Sector T is a treatment works. We have lowered BOD from 20 milligrams per liter down to 15 milligrams per liter based on the statistical analysis of data that we have been receiving from regulated entities. as well as for Sector U, specifically only for SIC codes 2074 to 2079. And this sector is the food and kindred products sector. We are lowering TSS from 100 milligrams per liter to 50 milligrams per liter. So these are the basic changes that we are making to the general permit. Other ones are just clarification, formatting. We are on track to go ahead and right now issue this permit to renew on August 14 of 2021. We will not be renewing it early. We've had some questions on that. And we've also received some questions about when do entities need to renew their authorization. So the authorization will be due within 90 days after of the general permit being renewed. So if the permit gets issued on August 14 of 2021, then entities will have 90 days to go ahead and renew their authorization. If authorization is no longer needed, please keep in mind that every year on September 1st, we do calculations and determine who is needing to have a water quality fee. So we will assess the water quality annual fee for FY22 on September 1st of next year. So if an authorization is no longer needed, please terminate your authorization prior to August 31st so that you will not be assessed that water quality fee. And that's all I have right now for the MSGP renewal.
All right, everyone. I'm going to go through quite a few updates for a variety of our general permits. We have our renewal of our aquaculture general permit, which is TXG 130000. We're proposing to renew and amend that general permit, which authorizes the discharge of wastewater from aquaculture facilities and other activities related to aquaculture into or adjacent to water in the state. This general permit expires on April 18th of 2021. The draft permit is available for review and comment, and the comment period ends on November 2nd, 2020. Again, the comment period is open right now, and it ends on November 2nd, 2020. The next one I have is the renewal of the concrete batch general permit, which is TXG 110000. We're proposing to renew and amend this general permit, which authorizes discharges from ready-mix concrete plants, concrete production plants, and their associated facilities. The current permit expires in November of 21, and we're currently developing that draft permit now. The next one is the renewal of the evaporation pond general permit, WQG 100,000. On September 15th, 2020, the Commission reissued that general permit, which authorizes wastewater generated by industrial or water treatment facilities to be disposed of by evaporation from surface impoundments adjacent to water in the state. Permit fees that are currently authorized under this general permit must submit a notice of intent form by December 14th, 2020 to continue their authorization. If they do not submit a notice of intent form by December 14th, they will be operating without a permit. Amendment of the hydrostatic test general permit, TXG 670000. We're proposing to amend the hydrostatic test general permit, which authorizes the discharge of hydrostatic test water from new vessels which previously contained raw water, potable water, or elemental gases, or vessels which previously contained petroleum substances or waste related to petroleum substances. The primary purpose of the amendment is to allow discharges of hydrostatic test water from new and existing vessels into water in the state from crude oil and natural gas exploration, development, and production operations to be eligible for authorization upon EPA authorizing TCEQ to regulate these activities. So just want to reiterate that we're amending it to add discharges from crude oil and natural gas facilities, but that they will not be eligible for authorization until EPA grants us authority to regulate those discharges. Status of that amendment is comment period ended on October 17th, and the Commission is expected to take action on this general permit tomorrow at our Commissioner's agenda. And another general permit we have, the water treatment plant general permit TXG 640000. On October 12th, the Commission issued this new general permit which authorizes the discharge of wastewater generated as a result of conventional water treatment at water treatment facilities into or adjacent to water in the state. Facilities that qualify for the general permit and discharge into water in the state may obtain authorization under the general permit by submitting a notice of intent form. Facilities that qualify for the general permit and discharge adjacent to water in the state, such as land application, are not required to submit a notice of intent. They can simply comply with the requirements of the general permit. So that's our newest, latest and greatest general permit that we've added to our list of general permits that are available. Any facilities that are currently authorized under a conventional water treatment plant individual permit may choose to submit an application and transfer their authorization to the general permit at any point in time. They can either do it now and then cancel their individual permit, or they can wait until just prior to their individual permit expiration, and when they would normally submit an individual permit renewal, they can request authorization under this general permit. So it's really up to for those existing wastewater treatment plants, it's really up to the owner of that facility to determine whether they want to transition to the general permit now or at some point in the future before their individual permit expires. And my last general permit is the renewal of the concrete batch general permit, TXG 110000. We're proposing to renew and amend. Oh, I have this up. I have this backwards. I'm sorry, my notes are out of order. The concrete batch general permit, I believe I already talked about. The pesticide general permit, TXG 870000. It authorizes the discharge of pesticides for the control of mosquitoes and other insects, vegetation and algae, animal pests, area-wide pests, and forest canopy pests. That general permit also expires in November of 21, and we're developing that general permit now. So with that, that's all of my general permit announcements. So my next topic is the rulemaking for Chapter 281. We revised Chapter 281 to allow administrative NODs to be submitted to the applicant and receiving correspondence back from the applicant via email. That was to expedite our permitting process. The rule previously required our letters to be submitted by a certified return receipt with a 30-day response time by using email, especially if there's only a few items that are deficient in an application. By sending an email and providing a shorter period of time for response, we can move our permit applications along a little bit faster. That rulemaking was adopted on October 7th. So that one is a completed project. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah to talk about Chapter 319 rulemaking.
Good afternoon. I'm Sarah Johnson with the Industrial Wastewater Permits team. The TCQ initiated rulemaking to amend Chapter 319, General Regulations Incorporated into Permits, to clarify the alternate test procedure or ATP process in accordance with the EPA's 2017 Clean Water Act Methods Update Rule. The rulemaking clarifies the ATP procedure to better align with the federal rules in 40 CFR Part 136 for our discharge permits and establishes the state ATP procedure for our TLAP permits. Additional staff recommended changes included the removal of an obsolete section identified in the last rules review for Chapter 319, the removal of inconsistencies, improved rule structure, use of consistent terminology, and overall improved readability. The proposed rulemaking was published in the June 5th, 2020 issue of the Texas Register. The public hearing was canceled due to COVID restrictions. The comment period closed on July 6, 2020, and no public comments were received. The rulemaking is scheduled to go before the commissioners for adoption tomorrow, October 21st, with an effective date of November 26, 2020. And now we'll give it over to Rebecca.
Hi, I'm going to now, excuse me, give you an update on the sand mining rule petitions. The Texas Aggregates and Concrete Association, known as TACA, and the Lake Houston Area Grassroots Flood Prevention Initiative filed two separate but similar petitions for rulemaking with the TCEQ on June 15 and June 23rd of this year, respectively. Both organizations recommended that TCEQ adopt a new rule that would establish best management practices for commercial sand mining and other lawful purposes within the San Jacinto River watershed. The rulemaking would define specific areas within the watershed that would be regulated and would add a new chapter within the 30 TAC Chapter 311, known as the Watershed Protection Rules. On August 12th, we took this to our commissioner's agenda, and on that day, the commissioners approved the two petitions and informed, the executive director to go ahead and initiate rulemaking with stakeholder involvement. So we have been busy working on preparing for that first stakeholder meeting, and we are pleased to let you know that our first stakeholder meeting is going to be November 10th. At 9:30, it is going to be a virtual live Teams stakeholder meeting. For further information, you can go to our webpage. We have a webpage specifically dedicated to the sand mining, and it's a long email address, but it's www.tcq.texas.gov/permitting/stormwater/sand mining rulemaking. So if you just go to our general stormwater webpage, we'll have a link to our specific webpage on sand mining. And again, we have a stakeholder meeting coming up on November 10th. It'll be a virtual stakeholder meeting. We have already sent out the invitation to the stakeholders that are of concern because they are located in the San Jacinto River watershed. Thank you.
Hello, Mike Lindner here. As a reminder, team leader, industrial wastewater permits. And I'm here today, in short, to tell you all what you need to do if you want to get, if you're a power plant and you want to get your wastewater permit changed to be in accordance with the recently updated 423 rules. So last Tuesday, the final version of the revised 40 CFR 423 rules. Those are the effluent limitation guidelines for power plants, for wastewater permits for power plants. And the final version of those rules was published last Tuesday. So if you are a permittee or a consultant for a permittee who's interested in revising their permit to come into accordance with the new rules, which are in general less stringent, I'm here to tell you how to do that, and that would be through a provision in 40 CFR, which is 40 CFR 122.62A3 small Roman numeral I, or I guess Roman numeral 1 looks like an I. And so there are basically three conditions that you have to meet in order to avail yourself of this provision to change your permit. The first one is that the conditions you're looking to change are based on the effluent limitation guideline. The second one is that the effluent limitation guideline has in fact changed, which again it has last Tuesday. And then the third one is that the permittee has to request modification within 90 days of after the Federal Register notice, which was last Tuesday. So January 11th would be your deadline to get us. And what we did is, because it just says that the permittee has to request modification within that time period. So we did seek clarification from EPA Region 6 on this, and they check with headquarters. So according to them, the proper way to comply with that part of the 3 conditions would be to send us a formal letter requesting a change or the changes that you want to make to your permit to be in accordance with the new ELGs, the new effluent limitation guidelines. And so, yeah, so you do not have to submit an application or a complete application within 90 days of last Tuesday, rather a formal letter to us requesting the changes you want to make. And that would be enough to be in compliance with that third thing that you have to do in order to get your permit changed. And so, yeah, and then of course, in order to actually get your permit changed, a letter would not suffice. You would have to then submit a full application to amend your permit accordingly. So that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. So my last update is on the House Bill 2771. We are pleased to announce that Governor Abbott signed the application on Friday, October 9th, and it was officially submitted to EPA Region 6 on Monday, October 12th, 2020. This is almost a year ahead of the legislatively mandated deadline of September 1, 2020, so we are super pleased about that. So the next steps on this is that this is per EPA. In our last oil and gas stakeholder meeting, EPA has 30 days to review the application and determine if it is complete, and they have 90 days to either approve or deny the request. During that 90-day period, EPA will publish notice of and take public comment on their decision and hold a public meeting during that public comment period. We'll continue to keep stakeholders involved with this application status as it undergoes EPA review, both through our Water Quality Advisory Group, which we're having today, as well as our oil and gas stakeholder group and those meetings associated with that. So with that, I will turn it over to Peter, and he can give his intro on the implementation procedures.
Thanks, Lori. Yes, our implementation procedures, officially it's called our procedures to implement the Texas Surface Water Quality Standards. We are revising our IPs, we call them the IPs for short. We are revising our IPs in step with revisions to the Texas Surface Water Quality Standards to address changes to the standards, to incorporate procedures worked out with EPA, to address past objections to our IPs, to implement new federal rules, and to provide additional updates where necessary to bring the document up to date. We've held 2 stakeholder meetings, one on March 9th and one on June 30th. The one on March 9th was actually in person. It's hard to believe we did things that way 6 months ago or whatever, but anyway, we received stakeholder input and public comments. You can visit our webpage for information regarding updated sections of the IPs, and the easiest way to get to that webpage is just to go to our TCEQ webpage, and in the TCEQ web search bar, type in implementation procedures, and that'll get you to our page. The following are topics to be addressed in the 2021 IP revisions. Plastics is a possibility, and this was mentioned briefly earlier. Rebecca Fialba touched on this a little bit, but as it applies to the IPs, it remains to be seen whether this will be addressed in the IPs in a standards revision or just how we're going to implement it, but we're working on that. pH screening procedures for certain entities that discharge directly to a classified segment. Another topic is procedures for reasonable potential analysis for whole effluent toxicity testing. TCEQ reached an agreement with EPA in 2015 to address objections to past whole effluent toxicity procedures, and so we're going to get that memorialized in this next IP revision. We are also updating federally listed threatened and endangered aquatic and aquatic dependent species. This is found in Appendix B of the IPs. We are updating Appendix C, which is critical low flow and harmonic mean flow data for classified segments. We're updating Appendix D. This is updates to classified segment ambient water quality values. And you may recall from our June 30 stakeholder meeting that we had not yet completed updates to all the segments for this appendix. That was just completed yesterday. So after some QA/QC checks, we'll be putting that updated appendix on our webpage for your viewing, consideration, and comment. So look for that in the next week or so. We're doing updates to minimum analytical levels. And you heard Dr. Johnson talk about this earlier in this meeting. So these updates are necessary to ensure our MALs are compliant with 40 CFR Part 136. We're proposing some minor changes to TDS screening procedures for chloride and sulfate in unclassified water bodies where whole effluent toxicity testing shows no reasonable potential for toxicity. So when it comes to TDS, chloride, and sulfate, there are two things we need to ensure that our permits are protective of water quality. These are water quality standards criteria and aquatic life. So we have numeric screening procedures to ensure that numeric water quality criteria will be maintained. And we hope to incorporate whole effluent toxicity testing to show that aquatic life will not be impacted and be able to use that instead of screening for chloride and sulfate in unclassified water bodies. We are doing updates for our toxic pollutants without criteria. We plan to remove the human health criteria from calculations to be consistent with current state and federal practice. And we're considering incorporation of bioequivalency factors. These are BEFs for dioxin and dibenzofurans. We've received comments requesting the use of the Great Lakes by BEFs for dioxin and dibenzofurans, similar to the way we'd used partitioning coefficients. If reasonable potential for toxicity is found, then the thought is we'd use the Great Lakes BEFs to calculate water quality-based effluent limitations and incorporate. Some congeners have very low potential for bioaccumulation. And we are also correcting just general errors and omissions in our IPs. So we hope to remain on schedule to get these revisions adopted by our commissioners in April of 2021. You're encouraged to visit our webpage to look at what we're updating, and feel free to provide comments. And you can provide those comments to ipcommnt@tceq.texas.gov. Again, that's ipcommnt@tceq.texas.gov. And now I will move on to the next topic, which is 401 certification rule updates. And this update is for anyone involved in dredge or fill activities requiring a federal 404 permit for which a 401 water quality certification is needed. There have been some changes to our 401 permitting process to address the Clean Water Act Section 401 certification rule, which was finalized by EPA on June 1, 2020, and became effective as a rule on September 11, 2020. This rule is the result of Executive Order 13868 issued by President Trump on April 10, 2019, promoting energy infrastructure and economic growth. It's important to know that this rule now requires that applicants for 404 permits that require a 401 water quality certification request a pre-filing meeting with TCEQ at least 30 days prior to submitting a certification request to the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. TCEQ is currently in discussion with the Army Corps of Engineers to craft a process to implement this rule. Our goal is to maintain our current process where possible to ensure that the projects that require State 401 water quality certification will progress forward without unnecessary delays and to ensure consistent reviews between our two agencies. Before the finalization of the rule, the Army Corps of Engineers issued a joint TCEQ Corps of Engineers public notice with a tiered approach. TCEQ would waive certification of projects with impacts below a certain size threshold if applicants were able to implement certain BMPs. That system allowed for efficient processing. Oh, I just got a meeting that maybe they couldn't hear me, but it looks like maybe you can now. Okay. I apologize if there are technical difficulties. So TCEQ, with that old process, TCEQ would waive certification of projects with impacts below a certain size threshold if applicants were able to implement certain BMPs. That system allowed for efficient processing of smaller projects and provided incentive for applicants to reduce project impacts. It also ensures efficient and consistent noticing by having one notice for both agencies. It is uncertain whether the Army Corps of Engineers will continue to honor this tiered process. Regarding issuance of public notices, we do not currently have a process for issuing public notices. Issuing a public notice would involve a significant effort and expenditure of resources in order to ensure noticing of the project, proper notification of adjacent landowners, public officials, state and federal agencies, and to ensure consistency between TCEQ and Army Corps of Engineers permits. So for the pre-filing requests, for now, what we know is that applicants for federal 404 permits that require 401 water quality certification will need to submit a pre-filing meeting request to TCEQ at least 30 days prior to submitting a certification request to the federal permitting authority, which is typically the Army Corps of Engineers. A pre-meeting request, a pre-meeting will be granted at the discretion of the assigned TCEQ project review. It's not required that a meeting take place, but it is required that a pre-filing meeting request be requested. Documentation of the request is required by the federal permitting authority. The TCEQ will accept pre-meeting requests through email. Pre-meeting requests can be sent to 401certs@tceq.texas.gov. That's 401certs@tceq.texas.gov. A response email will be returned to confirm receipt of the pre-meeting request. Applicants will need to provide a copy of TCEQ's confirmation email to the federal permitting authority along with their certification request. So once we have a process worked out with the Army Corps of Engineers, we'll be updating our 401 certification webpage with our new processes, any new forms or documents needed to implement that process. So please put the word out to consultants and applicants and let them know that a pre-filing meeting request is now required for all 401 water quality certifications. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Peter. And actually, I've got one clarification question for you before we go into the main Q&A session.
Sure.
On the implementation procedures timeline, I think you said that the goal is to get the IP revisions to commissioners for adoption in April 2021, but I believe that should be for proposal, with adoption coming 6 months later, approximately. So is that correct?
Okay. Yeah, that's correct. Sorry about that. Thanks for that clarification.
Okay, no problem. Just want to make sure I got that right. So, okay, well, again, thanks to all the presenters. We'll now step into the Q&A part of the meeting, and I'll just go through the questions that have been sent through the Q&A panel feature on Teams Live. And first question has to do with House Bill 2771 activities, and this will be for Lori. The question is, it is my understanding that open EPA MPDES enforcement matters be transferred to TCEQ upon delegation. If that is the case, what can we expect for that process / timeline for administrative and agreed orders?
I'm sorry, I was muted again. So we're in permitting, and I would have to go back and look at the delegation application to see the specifics of the transfer of enforcement actions and how that's laid out. So what I can do is I will go back and review that and put together a response, and I'll include that in our meeting notes, which are posted on our Water Quality Advisory Work Group webpage. So after the meeting, we compile notes and post those out there on the web. So I'll be sure and provide a response to this comment or this question in our meeting notes.
All right, thank you, Lori. Stay right there. The next question is about concrete batch plant GP item. And it says, I did hear Lori briefly mention the concrete batch plant GP. Is there any additional information about the updates and changes to this permit? And it sounds like maybe the individual didn't hear your initial update, so maybe you could give just a quick synopsis of that.
All right, I guess the camera's going to stay on Greg, but I can answer the question. Right now, we don't have the list of changes for that general permit finalized yet, so we're still in the process of developing that renewal with amendment. The permit expires next November, so November of 21, and we're currently developing the draft. So that's the status update on that one.
Thank you, Lori. Next question is on the sand mining rule. On the sand mining rule, would those best management practices be enforceable provisions, or is that to be determined? So I guess Rebecca, if you could answer that, please.
Hi. Yes. The question is, on sand mining rule, would those BMPs be enforceable provisions, or is that to be determined? So yes, the commissioners asked us to proceed to have stakeholder involvement to determine these rules. So the specifics of the actual rule requirements will be developed as we go through the stakeholder process and get their input. However, once those BMPs are going to be included in an entity's stormwater pollution prevention plan, then those BMPs will become enforceable, and there will be an enforceable permit provision at that point as well.
All right, thank you, Rebecca. This next question is for Mike, and it is on effluent limitation changes for steam electric. Would the change to permit have to be noticed to the public, or is it considered a minor amendment? So, Mike.
Well, it's going to depend on the change you want to make, but if it's going to make the permit less stringent, then that would be a major amendment. So public notice would be required. And so, yeah, that's the general. And I would think that mostly people would be wanting to change their permits to make them less stringent. So yeah, public notice will be required as part of the normal major amendment process. Hope that answers your question, and willing to answer more if need be. And also, we can get you a link to the preamble to the final rule that we'll provide in the meeting notes, so you can go and see, what all the changes are, and so I'll make sure that those get posted with the meeting notes.
Thank you, Mike. And actually, the next question is for you as well, and it's just The question, just requesting a general explanation of the changes in CFR 423.
So I haven't read, again, it was only last Tuesday when the final rule came out, so I haven't read it in its entirety. It's my understanding that conditions and possibly limits for bottom ash transport water and flue gas desulfurization water are less stringent, as are the dates for complying with those limits, which the final date to comply was December 31st, 2023. I think they've changed that to 2028. So generally, the changes are along those lines.
Thank you, Mike. Next questions for Peter on 401 certification. Are pre-meeting requests public information? And when does public get notice about 401 water certification using this process?
401 meeting requests would be subject to public information requests. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. And the second part of the question, I didn't quite understand that. Can you read that one more time, Greg?
Sure. So when does the public get notice about 401 water certification using this process?
I'm not exactly sure what the person is asking, but
well, and I guess maybe it's whether the notice would, I guess it may depend, and you can elaborate, Peter, but whether the public notice would continue to be jointly done with the Corps of Engineers, or if, for some reason the process would change and we'd have to do a separate notification ourselves. Maybe that's part of the question.
Yeah, if we do a joint public notice, well, that some of those processes still remain to be seen. But if the question is, when will somebody be notified that they need to submit a 401 pre-filing or certification pre-filing meeting request, the Corps is informing people if people are submitting permit applications directly to the Corps is informing them that they need to come to us and request a meeting request. If they're coming to us, then we are informing applicants that they need to request that pre-filing meeting. And as I mentioned earlier, it's not required that a meeting take place, but it is required that a meeting be requested. So it's essentially a box that needs to be checked, and before somebody can move on to requesting a certification from the Corps, a 404 certification from the Corps, at least 30 days before they do that, they need to provide that pre-meeting request to TCEQ.
All right, thank you, Peter. And I guess for the questioner, if we didn't quite get at what you were looking for, feel free to submit another clarifying question and we'll be happy to respond to that. Moving on, the next question looks like that'll be for Laurie. Is there a summary of changes to the aquaculture general permit?
Yes, so the draft permit for public review and comment. The comment period ends on November 2nd, 2020. So that's the current status of that general permit.
But I'm sorry, Laurie, as far as a list or a summary of changes.
Oh, summary of changes. I don't have that available with me right now. They are available on the website. So if you go to the tcq.texas.gov, and if on the top right corner of the page, there's a search engine. If you put in the word available general permit, it'll take you to a list of our available general permits. And on that page, you'll find the aquaculture general permit, and the fact sheet includes a summary of changes. So that's a good location where you can find a summary of those changes. Again, it's tcq.texas.gov. Go to the top right search engine, put in available general permits, and it'll take you to our page. And on that page, you'll find the fact sheet for that general permit, which outlines the changes.
Thank you, Lori. Next question is for Rebecca. And the question is, I would like to verify that the current MSGP set to expire in August 2021 will be issued in August of 2021, or do you see any potential delays at this time? You there, Rebecca? You might be on mute.
I'm not live yet.
And that's okay if we can still hear you.
I can still speak?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So yes, right now we are just on track. You know, we're actually a little ahead, but we're on track on getting the MSGP reissued by August 14 of 2021. We are hoping to go to Commissioner's agenda sometime early July, mid-July of 2021 for them to go ahead and review and approve the general permit so that it would have an effective date of August 14th. So right now, everything seems to be going on track. As I said, EPA gave us approval, so we saved some time in that we didn't have to address any revisions or comments with EPA. Usually that's where we sometimes have a delay. So we're hoping that the official public comment period for the public goes smoothly and that we're able to respond to all the comments in a timely manner. So right now we see no problem with having that permit issued on time.
Thank you, Rebecca. Next question. I'll actually handle this next question, and it asks, is there any further development on the thermal evaluation procedures of power plant thermal discharges? And so I believe we may have mentioned this in past meetings, recent meetings. We did get approval from EPA to use the proposed draft evaluation procedures that are out on our implementation procedures webpage, to use them in sort of an SOP type approach, kind of a road testing sort of approach. And so, you know, we started doing that. I guess if the questioner wants to inquire about a specific permit, feel free to send us a question or an email about it, and we can talk more specifics on a particular permit. But in general, yes, we've in sort of an informal sense have started to kind of road test those procedures in permits, and as we do that, we certainly will be working with permittees as those procedures are tested, if you will. So thank you for your question. Next questions for Lori. Can Lori please go over the general updates to the HT general permit? Didn't quite catch all the info, and I guess is that the hydrostatic general permit,
Yes.
Lori?
Yes, sir. So the primary purpose of the amendment is to allow discharges of hydrostatic test water from new vessels and existing vessels into water in the state from crude oil and natural gas exploration, development, and production operations to be eligible for authorization under the general permit on TCEQ receiving EPA approval to regulate those activities. So the comment period ended in August, and the commission is expected to take action on the draft permit at agenda tomorrow. Again, so the applicability, just to clarify, the applicability for that general permit was expanded to include oil and gas facilities, but they cannot get coverage under that general permit until EPA grants TCEQ delegation authority. So it's in there, but it's kind of on hold until we get authority.
All right, thank you, Lori. And looks like we've got a follow-up question from the earlier one about 401 certification, Peter, and it's clarifying that the questioner meant or was inquiring about for the public when would they know that an applicant has requested a new permit using the faster executive process?
Okay, the public would know when the public notice is released, and if it's a joint public notice, then it would just be one notice being issued likely by the Army Corps of Engineers, or if it switches to us issuing the public notice, it would just be us issuing the public notice. So, and then if it was two different notices, the Army Corps of Engineers would issue a notice, TCEQ would issue a separate notice. So there would be two notices for this one project, one federal and one state. And that's how the public would know and have an opportunity to comment.
All right, thank you, Peter. And I have gotten some messages that there may be some technical difficulties that we're experiencing. So if that translates to any interrupted transmission on the audience's end, I apologize for that, but hopefully that'll get smoothed out. Have another question for Lori on HB 2771, and it reads, for HB 2771 regarding the time frame for EPA approving application for delegation after the EPA holds the public meeting and addresses any public comments, how long until EPA approves the application? First question. So second one, when the application is approved by EPA, what is the time frame for TCEQ being the regulator for these types of facilities? Immediate, or is there a transition period?
All right, so tackling that was a long one, but essentially what I'm hearing is how long until EPA approves the application. At our last oil and gas stakeholder meeting, EPA chimed in and said that they have a 30-day period to review the application for completeness to make sure it contains all of the required elements that are in rule, and then they have a 90-day period to approve or deny the application. And within that 90 days is the public comment period, etc. So we're estimating that we could potentially, if EPA approves our application, be granted authority possibly by the end of January of 2021. That's an estimate, again, based on EPA's time frame that they've provided. The next question is, what's the time frame for us, for TCEQ being regulator? Is it immediate or is there a transition period? So it's my understanding that once EPA approves our authority, that we would immediately be able to issue permits for those entities. So it would be immediate, to my understanding.
All right, thank you, Lori. And I am not seeing any other questions at the moment, so I'll just give a last call for questions. I'll go over a couple announcements, but if you have any other questions you want to send in real quick for us to respond to, please type them in quickly. But let me jump to the announcements real quick and just mention that our next Water Quality Advisory Work Group meeting will be held in January. So specifically that date is January 19th, 2021. That's a Tuesday, and it'll be at the same time slot, 1:30 p.m. I would guess that would probably be another virtual meeting, but don't really know at this point. So we'll definitely keep you posted as far as how we'll hold the meeting and give you all the details as we get closer to that date. And then secondly, just a reminder what Lori mentioned earlier in the meeting about the House Bill 2771 stakeholder meeting. That's going to be on December 10th, 2020 at 1:30 p.m. And if you do want to get added to the stakeholder lists for that meeting and for future meetings and correspondence, please send an email request to hb277one@tceq.texas.gov. And so that's all the announcements I have, and I don't see any other questions at the moment. So I believe at this point we will adjourn the meeting. I thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next time, and appreciate your participation as always. So thank you, and have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.